All right, so I'll be starting with the land acknowledgement from York University, after which I will read very briefly the description of this talk, and then I'll turn things over to Professor Elaine Coburn, who is the director for the Center for Feminist Research at York University. They are co-organizing this event with us, and we're really pleased to have them co-facilitate this particular conversation. Professor Coburn will then introduce our three speakers, and then each of the speakers will have an opportunity with opening remarks to set up the conversations, after which we'll be taking questions from you or moderating the conversations. York University recognizes that many indigenous nations have long-standing relationships with the territories upon which York University campuses are located that precede the establishment of York University. The university acknowledges its presence on the traditional territory of many indigenous nations. The area known as the Karanto has been caretaken by the Ashnabek Nation, the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, and the Huron-Wendat. It is now home to many First Nation, Inuit, and Métis communities. We acknowledge the current treaty holders, the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation. This territory is a subject of the Dish with One Spoon, One Pond Belt Covenant, an agreement to peaceably share and care for the Great Lakes region. Now, recently, blatant infractions on women's rights in Afghanistan have garnered outrage, interest, and despondency from the global community. With increasing restrictions on education, movement, and work, human rights activists are concerned about the impact of these policies on women's future in the country. Stuck between the proverbial rock and the hard place, rights activists navigate domestic oppressions and international imperialism in defending women's rights in untenable circumstances. Among other things, our panelists today will be addressing how the history of nation building, occupation, international relations, and power dynamics in Afghanistan impact the current situation. And maybe we'll all get a chance to speak to who bears responsibility for women's rights in terms of solidarity, beyond the collective outrage. How can the international community work in solidarity with activists to protect hard-won rights in Afghanistan? I'll turn things over now to Professor Elaine Coburn to introduce our speakers to us. Elaine.
Thanks very much, Professor Bawa, and I'd also like to thank you for organizing this series this year, because I know that's a lot of extra work, and it's been many stimulating conversations on very important conversations, of which today is one. And thanks also to Suzanne Forster for doing all the technical work behind the scenes to keep things running. I'm very pleased and would like to thank all of our speakers today. So I'm going to introduce them in order, and then I'll invite them to speak for about 5 to 7 minutes each, and then we'll open it up right away for questions from the audience. Zahra Nader is an Afghan-Canadian journalist and the editor-in-chief of Zan Times, a media that covers human rights violation in Afghanistan with a focus on women, LGBTQI community, and environmental issues. She started her career in 2011 in Kabul, writing and editing for Afghan local media outlets. In 2016, she joined the New York Times bureau in Kabul, becoming the first Afghan woman journalist to work with a mainstream English language media since 2001. She is currently based in Toronto, Canada, where she is pursuing a PhD in gender, feminist, and women's studies at York University. Mina Sharif is a communications advisor and grassroots mobilizer with a focus on Afghanistan. Raised in Canada, she returned to her birth country, Afghanistan, in 2005 to support women-led radio stations throughout the country. Over the next 15 years, she worked for various Afghan-led private media organizations, including Moby Group, where she directed the Afghan version of Sesame Street. Mina also wrote and directed Voice of Afghan Youth, a TV and radio series filmed in 11 provinces, and is founder of the Sisters for Sisters mentorship program. She currently leads Compassion First Consultancy and various volunteer initiatives supporting at-risk families and communities in Afghanistan. Sahar Fetrat is an assistant researcher with the Women's Rights Division at Human Rights Watch. Zahra is a feminist activist born in Afghanistan who has lived in Iran and Pakistan as a young refugee during the first Taliban regime. She grew up in Kabul as her family returned to Afghanistan in late 2006 when she was 10. Sahar encountered feminist activism in her teenage years in Kabul and decided to incorporate her feminist views into storytelling through documentary filmmaking and writing. Her documentary on street harassment, Do Not Trust My Silence, in 2013, won the first prize in the Universo Corto Elba Film Festival. Sahar has previously worked with the education unit of UNESCO in Afghanistan, advocating for literacy education for women around the country. She's gained firsthand experience working with the children who have been victims and survivors of war through volunteering with the Solace for Children initiative. She holds a bachelor's degree in business administration from the American University of Afghanistan and a master's degree in critical gender studies from Central European University. She is currently completing her second master's degree in conflict, security, and development at the War Studies Department of King's College. And with that, I'd like to invite each of you in the order that I just presented to speak for about 5 to 7 minutes, just to introduce what you believe are the kind of critical questions and themes that those who are here today need to know about. So I'll invite Zahra to speak first.
Thank you, Professor Coburn. This is a very, I want to thank you, Professor Bawa and Professor Coburn, for organizing this event, and all the people that are here to listen to us, and the two inspiring panelists, Mina, Sharif, and Sahar Fetrat, which are inspiring their work for me personally. And I'm very, very pleased and privileged to be here. I want to start from the grand situation we know in Afghanistan is right now. Afghanistan is the only country on the planet that denies women the right to education, the right to work. To put it simply, the basic human rights is denied to women in Afghanistan based on gender, based on sex. And my question is, like, how did we get here? Like, we are in the 21st century. And we are living, women of Afghanistan, an estimated 20 women in Afghanistan do not have the right to participate in social and political life. They cannot go to school, they cannot go to university, they cannot simply work and earn their living and be part of society, be part of their society. But the question is, how did we get here? And when I was thinking that what is very important for me and what the critical things that shape my identity and who I am and the things that went, for me, is history. I think history was a very big part of the factor that we can explain how things get here. I wanted to start with a quote from my favorite historian, Howard Zinn. He says that history is important. If you don't know history, it is as if you were born yesterday. And if you were born yesterday, anybody up there in the position of power can tell you anything, and you have no way of checking up on it. I think this quote so much reflects what I lived as a young woman in Afghanistan post-Taliban. Like Sahar, I was also a refugee in Iran when the Taliban took over Afghanistan the first time. And in Iran, I was denied the right to education. And when we returned to post-Taliban Kabul, I was able to go to school, and I completed my school in Kabul, and I went to university, and I graduated with a bachelor degree in law. However, I have little perception of past of what was like for women, what women were doing before me, what they were fighting, what they were inspiration, what they were talking about, and how they were engaging in society. I didn't know much about it. And it was not available for me in the history textbook that I studied in school, in university. So very much I grew up in a void of not knowing my roots, where is my roots, and that void created a situation for me to feel that if we are able to go to school, if we are able to participate in social life, it's because of what happened in 9/11 and the invasion of Afghanistan in 2001. So basically that false narrative, that things that we didn't have any rights, that it was the US and its allies that give us these rights to be able to be part of our society. And I think that perception was so much wrong, and it somehow didn't empower us to create conscious movement that we can ask for our rights, that this is what we want. Because when you look back and you see nothing, and you feel that what you have is the best you can have, is because there was nothing for you, and this is the first time you're able to get some rights. And if you go ask for more, people will say like, hey, you didn't have anything, and then what you have right now, you should be very thankful. And that was the attitude that I grew up with, that this is what we have, and we should be thankful for this. And I think that was the problem that I see. Because if I knew that the details of women's struggle in Afghanistan, how women before me lived, what they have done, what rights, what was their position, their situation in my society, I could build from that. I would say if women in Afghanistan have rights to social participation, if they were able to go to work, if they were able to take part in social life in the 1960, 1950, 1970, and they could even dress the way they wanted, at least speaking in the cities. But that right, I didn't have. Like, I grew up in post-Taliban Afghanistan in a US-supported Afghan government, but I didn't have the right to dress the way I wanted. And most of the things that were available to me, I wasn't really able to build on that so much, because it was felt to me that I should be thankful for what I have right now. And this is the best we can have, or we can achieve. So that created that perception that didn't help us, that didn't let us to think critically and to really see how things went, and how did we grow up from a situation where we have rights, we were able to, some of the rights that I didn't have in post-Taliban Kabul, women before me had. Then how come I don't have it? I would be asking for that. But when I didn't know, I wasn't able to ask for anything. I remember, I think it was maybe early, so don't quote me in the date, but I think it was maybe 2013, when I had a guest in my house. She was a woman from the previous generation who studied in Kabul University. And she was my guest, and she started talking about her experience in Kabul, where she lived, and things she has done. What she told me felt like a lie to me, like, what she's talking, like, no, I never heard of what she's talking. Maybe she's lying, like, how can things be like that and I don't know about it? I'm an educated woman. I am a journalist. I went to university, and I don't know that. Like, probably she's lying. So that was my first thought. And when she told me that she was an activist in Kabul University, that they were fighting for equal rights, that they had demands, political demands, that they were pushing the government to accept their demands. And they were organizing protests, and they were spreading, letters, going door to doors, inviting people to take part in their protests. She told me that I was working to the point that I was going home at 1 a.m. in the morning, and I was leaving home at 5 a.m. That was like, oh my God, this is not true, because the Kabul that I was leaving, so you're thinking that the perception is that as you go, time passes, things get better, it's not get worse. So it was hard for me to stomach the fact that she was living in a better Kabul than I was living, because my perception was that as we go, things get better. So the Kabul that I lived, I wasn't able to get out to come my home at 1 a.m. in the morning alone, because I wasn't allowed to be out, past 7 p.m. because that would be dangerous for a woman to be alone out. And also I wasn't able so much to go out before it's become maybe 7 or 6 in the morning. So even those small things really made me think of like, oh my God, like, I have to go and find out like what she's saying. If this is true, I have to find out the truth about this. And that was the point that I started going learning, of course, English and going to other materials that were available, but not so much in my own language. So I studied the researches and books that is written on Afghan women and their struggle in the past, in the 1960, 1970, 1980. And that was then a moment of, like we had something. But then the question was why it was denied to me, why they didn't help me to get a sense of where did we started, how things were, and how we can get things moving forward. I think the problem that for so long I see was this part. And for now, I'm really hoping for my PhD to be able to focus in that history and to bring it to life and to make it accessible for a generation of women in Afghanistan. Because if you don't know your roots, it is very hard to connect. As Howard Zinn says, if you don't know your history, then there is no way for you to check up on what people in power tell you. I'm going to end the first part here. I'm sure I talk a lot, but we can definitely get back to this.
Thank you very much for that. I'm going to turn it straight over to Mina.
Hi, I'm going to echo what Zahra said about the privilege of being here. Thank you, this team panelists and professors and the team at York University. I'm actually going to touch on something in a different category than what Zahra was talking about. I want to share a little bit about what my lens has been, because it's a pretty unique one. And I think with this, with the group that we're sitting with, it might resonate. I grew up in Canada. So I'm a refugee to Canada from Afghanistan from previous wars. So we've had quite a number of cycles in Afghanistan. Whether or not people are familiar with the history of it, they've probably heard that it's been consecutive decades of unrest in Afghanistan. So I'm from a first round of that. So I grew up in Canada really with the same kind of access to what is Afghanistan, what is that, how do we connect ourselves to what's going on there? The same that probably everyone in this room who hasn't been to Afghanistan was seeing. Granted, I know it's my background, so I had access to what the culture is and what that means. But at the end of the day, once you're a refugee and you exit to a country, you're holding on to culture, but you're not in the daily life of what's going on in Afghanistan. So there was really no way for me to connect to that beyond headlines and, like I said, very dated, very pleasant, but dated updates from my parents and family. So it was really hard to have a genuine connection. And the reason I bring that up is because when I did move to Afghanistan and began to develop that connection to my country, but also people who had lived such a different upbringing than I had, it made me realize that it was close to impossible for me to have connected without actually having come to Afghanistan, without actually having lived it, without actually having day-to-day life in Afghanistan. So at times I hesitate, and at times I really push for what I call, or not what I call, what I hate to call, humanizing of Afghanistan. And it's something that feels like a very heavy weighted task on my shoulders as someone who has lived in both worlds, to sort of continuously lobby for the fact that I come from a country of human beings and not just a country that is war. War is something that happened to Afghanistan. It's not who we are. And I feel very overwhelmed with tell us about Afghanistan. Because that, I think if I were to go, steps back to before I had been to Afghanistan and someone said, so let me know what Canada's like. Unless it's a very relaxed conversational thing, which would be fun. I could talk about, TV shows I loved in Canada and foods I love in Canada. But, as Afghans, we're immediately pressured to tell you about all the things that are wrong with our country. So we're just really perpetuating even more of what you already think. And so it becomes very difficult for us to offer you both the realities of the war and the realities of the strength of the people who are living with war in the backdrop of their lives. So what I'm going to talk about a little today is what I see as a little bit more, I have my ups and downs, because I still feel like you need to hear those human stories. I actually do provide as much of my volunteer time as I can to creating content that gives you those glimpses into everyday Afghanistan, just from what I lived. And again, coming from sort of a Western raised Canadian lens, I think I know what will surprise you. I know what will feel kind of off when you've only had these headlines and you're suddenly hearing like, oh, the first time Mina had Cambodian food was in Kabul. I know that these things are not important, but they are at the same time, because you need to understand that we're not one-dimensional. We're not a monolith. There's so much more to Afghanistan, and that there's no talk in the world that I could give that would really have it resonate with you in the same way. So I suggest that we at times take a couple steps back and say, do I have to connect so fully to what the story is before I can get involved? Do I have to really, really, really know exactly how it felt for, Sahar to grow up in Kabul, for Zahra to move to Afghanistan at the young age she did? I don't know that we do. I think that what I've come to realize in now moving back to Canada and sort of frantically trying to explain that we're all human beings in Afghanistan too, and women are not just fighting for the right to wear what they want. It's the reason we are as frantic as we are is not to try to create the same life that we see in Western women. We have our own set of values that we're working fine, but what we're missing, because we're trying so hard to connect very personally to what's going on in Afghanistan, and is that it's basic human rights. It's basic human rights. And I think we can, instead of trying to really personally connect to what's going on in Afghanistan, just see it as the facts. And the facts are really, really, really evident that school has been taken away, that very, very simple rights like buying a SIM card, traveling without a male escort to a certain amount of distance, that these kind of rights that just continue to pile on one upon the other, upon the other, upon the other, are not only a sign of what life is like in Afghanistan, but as women from here who want to support, we don't need to worry about all the exact same things that Afghan women are worried about for their lives. We can also just worry about it as a sisterhood, realizing that injustice spreads, and injustice there will spread here, and it will continue to grow, and we foster it by taking pause and wondering if we relate enough to what's going on in Afghanistan to get involved or to say anything. So instead of worrying about, am I saying exactly the right thing? Am I completely understanding Sahar's life and Zahra's life and Mina's life? I would really let that go and say, let's keep it to that basic understanding and connect to it by listening, continuing to listen, continuing to hear more of these real stories of people's real lives. It also shouldn't be your homework to learn the entire, history of Afghanistan, from decades or even from the last 20 years. We need to look at it as more urgent. And I think when we're looking for connection, we can look for connection in the sense that this is dangerous for all of us as women, that something like this is being allowed to happen in one country, because most certainly it spreads. Most certainly this sort of power dynamic that is being held in Afghanistan over women is something that people don't just look at and think it's a one-off, if that's what they're looking to create in their own countries as well, in their own spaces as well. North America, I think we can safely say we're not safe from that either. And we're getting complacent in our own security with women's rights here. And it's only impounded by the fact that we're being pretty quiet when it's happening somewhere else. I think I'm circling into the same thing a couple of times, but really what I'm saying is don't task yourself with having to have that personal connection to that extent before you can just say to yourself, women are losing such basic human rights. I feel like that's enough for me to say something. That's enough for me to realize something is wrong there. That's enough for me to mobilize women in my community to say, these 5 things are missing in an Afghan woman's life. We have to make sure that doesn't spread. And again, just on that understanding, like I see Sahar, and the last time I saw her was, I think, at a cafe for lunch in Kabul. And I used to work with her sister, So we were just really lovely friends. But I saw Zahra, I've seen at like such dynamic, I've seen her speaking dynamically to crowds of people who don't know anything about Afghanistan. So it's such a deep, deep connection in that sense. I don't expect anyone to understand that, right? I mean, Zahra and I are connecting on fighting for a country that we don't know if we get to see again. Sahar and I probably expected to run back into each other over dinner somewhere. We're having dinner, or maybe through friends, and that we don't know will ever happen again. You don't have to personally connect to that. I think what you need to sort of, it helps to do that, sure, but what you really need to realize is that that just is something that can spread and will spread if we allow it to. And I won't, sorry.
I'll just ask you to conclude so that we can give a bit of time to Zahar. So
yes, I'm sorry. Okay, I'll leave it at that. If anyone has more questions, that's fine too. And we'll talk about sort of more practical ways that I was thinking we could do that involvement later.
So it's always a terrible role to be the moderator and have to interrupt. But in any case, we've heard something about the need to know history, and on the other hand, that kind of the desire for personal connection that sometimes is expressed by people in the West is not necessarily the most helpful when we're just talking about egregious violations of women's basic rights to freedom of movement, access to education, and these sorts of questions. And with that, I'll turn it over to Zahra for about 5 to 7 minutes, and then we'll open it up for questions.
Thank you so much for having me here in this panel. I also want to, it's still March, and I would like to start by acknowledging and honoring the raging spirits of our sisters in Afghanistan, who are really fighting with not one but so many demons at the same time. I just echoing, I was just listening to both Zahra and Mina, and it actually took me back to Kabul and the time that I grew up in Kabul, and it was a different time. We were really hopeful. I was a feminist activist as a teenager in Kabul, and just finding out, the spaces that we could take, or, reclaiming the streets, or going to restaurants, or being in places that were usually not very welcoming to women, or places that women would get harassed. These were things that we were reclaiming back, and going to parks and spending an afternoon in a park, and all of these things. And I am just, it breaks my heart just looking back and seeing how much hope we had, and how it was taken away from us, and how we were uprooted from our homes. And it's very, very hurtful. But beyond what I think or how I feel about it, I want to focus on what's happening to women in Afghanistan. And obviously there is not one reality, there are multiple realities at the same time ongoing. But what's happening in Afghanistan is no less than what's happening to women especially is no less than a crisis. And as every month passes, we see that it's changing to a deep wound. It is indeed a total war on bodies and existence of women. And by this time, we have seen that the Taliban have ordered more than 40 decrees, specifically to women. And through that, they have sought not only to erase women from public life, but to extinguish their basic humanity. And since August 2021, this one is very important. We need to acknowledge that there have been multiple narratives, but the two important ones are the fact that the Taliban take over Afghanistan. They took over Afghanistan, but another one, and the most important the one is the resistance of women. Since the very early days, women went to the street and chanted breadwork freedom. Both of them, all three of them, not only for women, but all the people of Afghanistan. And till this day, grassroots women-led movements have been the most visible and vocal civic opposition to the Taliban. Women have been risking their lives on a daily basis to advocate for the human rights of all Afghans. By this time, we can see that time is not linear, and our narratives are not and cannot be linear. Every day, a new reality emerges, and what we have to do as activists, as people who care, as people who have the privilege to watch and connect and analyze, it's important that we acknowledge the emerging movements, the emerging groups and teams and networks inside Afghanistan, as well as we do that outside Afghanistan. It's so important to not lose sight and have nuance and look both ways, because we have a lot of potential outside Afghanistan, but we have an enormous amount of potential and opportunities inside the country. And so most of what I care about and what I'm concerned about is about acknowledging these movements, acknowledging that there are people resisting, and there will be more and more, despite all the challenges, despite all the inhuman acts and actions and orders of the Taliban, there will be more groups. And so in a platform like this, I would like all of us to think about creative ways of engaging, of providing solidarity, listening and learning from people who are on the ground, but also use all the resources that we have outside, and think of ways to emerge them and do something more useful, more hopeful, more thoughtful for Afghanistan.
Thank you very much to all three of you. I'd like to invite anyone, if they would like to they can either put a comment in the chat and I can read it out, or call on you, or if you'd like to raise your hand using either an electronic hand or your actual hand in the old-fashioned way, I'll do my best to identify you, and you're welcome to ask questions. So with that, I will invite Nadia Zawari to speak.
Thank you very much for this discussion. Actually, I'm one of you, this young generation. I'm proud of you. You are coming forward and talking in an international platform and raising the concern of the women in Afghanistan. I used to be an activist since I was 16, and I tried my best to search and find out the issues women of Afghanistan experiencing day to day in a refugee life. So I'm in a generation, I can tell you, maybe about 3-4 decades of experience how women are suffered. And I totally agree what my young women of Afghanistan said. They have all the concern, but as you mentioned, Susan, one of them is that we don't have a written history of women as we should have in our own language. So maybe there is so many documents, but this is not available for all those who are speaking either Dari or Pashto. We only have a couple of poem women like Rabia Balkhi and Nazwana and others. That is very romantic, and so our history is very much dominated patriarchally. So who is writing the history is very, very strange in my country. And the points that our history shaped my today is very true. And, but also like coming from a Kabul, elite families, etc., that matters how enabling environments you have to move forward. But today, the women of Afghanistan are a victim of political deals. So we cannot, we have like very different variety of history in my country. Like from 60s, one history, a very city type of life, follow Western patterns, etc. But then we have village women, and then we had later on a very different conservative way of life that women followed. But throughout the history, there was always an evolving, always there was a balcony of women movements. So we have to agree on that. And either they are suppressed or they come out of that situation they were in. Today is the very, very sad days of Afghan women life. And the reason is that there is a political deal by man to shape the history of women. And this is the painful. And even international communities, they are saying, go fight your fight. You know, this is not my fight. For instance, Joe Biden, this is his statement. When we need it, we put 130,000 soldiers on the field, heavy militarization inside the country. And the day I don't want it, go you fight your war, you know? This type of statements really is very sad, very depressing. And I, from this platform, asking each individuals who are participating to ask their politicians from Canada. The Canada is a country that they are considered to be peaceful, they are cooperative, very feminist, pro-woman. And I agree with one of other friends, Ms. Sharif, said that this type of mentality is transferring to this part of the world. You know, people are moving. We are not like static. So we are dynamic and we are moving from one part into another part. So imagine we have a big population of like-minded people in Canada, and what will be the situation of women here in Canada. So I endorse what my young generation speaking, and I don't have any question for them, because the question is basic rights of women are denied in a country of 40 millions. People are facing forced immigration or refugee. People are dying, and there is hundreds of evidence that how women are suffering in Afghanistan, but the world is silent. We have to break this silence, and we have to bring change in the status quo of the women rights in Afghanistan. Thank you.
Thank you very, very much for bringing your own experiences and observations and concerns. I don't know if any of our panelists would like to respond to any of that in the immediate, or would you just like me to take the next question? Okay, I'll go on to the next question, and then you can think a little bit. And if you'd like to respond after that, you're very welcome to. So, Pratiksha, you're very welcome to speak.
Hi, thanks, Elaine. And yeah, you're one of the few people who took my name correctly. I really, really appreciate it. Thank you. My question is actually for everybody. So I am a PhD researcher at York, and because of what's happening, I actually changed my entire project. I was working on Kashmir, and now I want to work on Afghanistan, and especially Afghani women's experiences, Afghani refugee women's experiences. But as someone who doesn't have the background and is trying to get as much contextual knowledge, what, in your opinion, would be a good step to begin? And the other thing that I noticed with my Kashmiri interviews was I did not want to touch on a lot of sensitive topics because of the trauma. So how does one navigate that when you want to know, but you don't want to traumatize the other person? Yeah. Thank you.
Yes, Mina, I think would like to respond.
Hi, that's a great question. And I do think that I have some personal experience with that, having been the child of refugees who escaped one round of war, and having grown up in that that level of trauma, but then also myself losing a place that I called home years later, also again due to war. I think while trauma isn't something that we want to push buttons with, it's just a matter of fact of trauma for Afghanistan. And I think being heard in their experiences is more important. I think with refugees, one thing that happens a lot I've seen it in our Afghan community, is we are so stuck in survival mode that once we are refugees in a new country, we are so busy being grateful that we're just alive and well, that we don't pause to think, wait a minute, why did I have to be a refugee in the first place? And that's why cycles continue, and we don't take people, we don't take our host countries, for example, to be accountable in why we're here in the first place. It's great that we're grateful and appreciate the opportunity to be safe and sound in Canada. I know I do. I know my family does. But as an adult versus when I was a child refugee, I'm wondering, what did Canada feel about being present in Afghanistan in the first place? Because I know of a few former soldiers, for example, who are in hiding and in danger, very directly related to Canada's involvement. So, we don't usually dare to say that the country that is keeping me safe is also responsible for why I'm a refugee in the first place. But I think if we created spaces where we were listening to refugees more honestly, then we could start to address that. And I think that's one of the reasons that Afghanistan has been in such a cycle of war, is because once we are safe, we're so busy being grateful for that we're unable to talk about how we end this and how we move through it. So I would suggest that, yes, you do talk to people of different generations, and just acknowledge that, yes, it is traumatic. And yes, we are absolutely grateful. I like I said, I am as well, but that there are dimensions to being a refugee, and some are quite negative, including the relationship to the host country at times.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
If I may build on what Mina was talking about, and also thank you for this question. I think this idea of working and sort of creating ways for Afghan refugees to share their experiences is I think a great work. But building on what Mina was saying in terms of the cycle of wars that we have in our country, I think when I am in more in an audience that doesn't really know about Afghanistan a lot, there's this assumption that Afghanistan is violent, the people are very misogynist, that essentialization of that this people is by nature misogynist and anti-woman, and this is their culture. So that is sort of the narrative that is created for us. But I think we have to really take a step back. And when I was earlier mentioning about history and why it's important for us to know history, is that until that point that this country's investment and interest was not in Afghanistan, we were living relatively a good life, and the women had some rights, and they were pushing for more because that society was peaceful and hopeful, and they were building toward a better future. They were fighting for it. But then what happened? Everything shifted. I think that point is we don't really get to talk about it, because that if we talk about that would bring in the other countries like Canada, US, and other countries whose involvement there created this situation for us. And the reason I think we have to always be mindful of history is this reason, because if we don't see that history, it's very easy to essentialize people's lives and to say, hey, they are by nature misogynist. They are their culture is like this, what the world can do when their man is not doing anything, it's all the problem that men create for them. I think being able to see that history makes you think that, in social life, change doesn't happen overnight. It happens slowly and over time. And the fact that until 1970, early 1970, we're living a good life because, this involvement in the country. When they started the invasion of the Soviet in Afghanistan, and then the Soviet being rival to the US, and the investment, the CIA's largest covert operation in Afghanistan, they supported a group that created the situation we are living in right now. There was progressive forces, there's a question. Of course, the US wanted, those Western countries wanted the Soviet out of Afghanistan because this was their rivalry. They wanted to give the Soviet the defeat they experienced in Vietnam. So they wanted to make Afghanistan the Vietnam of Soviet. But at whose cost? It was at the cost of Afghanistan people. And what really hurt is that there was alternative groups that could receive that support, that could build a better future for us. That was progressive forces who were pushing for more secular society where we would be able to recognize equally, right? Those sources were on the ground, but yet these countries decided to choose a group that is extremely had it, extremist and misogynist forces, mostly Islamist forces. Until that point in our history, we don't have, this mullahs being so much in power and being able to shape our culture according to what they wanted our society to go after. I think the problem started from there, that these countries injected money, weapons to our society, to the groups that, of course, were building on their they had their own agenda, right? But I guess if we just change the factor that if they put that support into another group that were more progressive, would we be here? I doubt that. And that support continues. So they did it in the 1980s, and they get what they wanted. Soviet left Afghanistan, and that collapsed, and they came and lived their life, and they forgot about Afghanistan. And then 9/11 happened, and 9/11 was actually the consequence of that politics of the US and Western countries in the 1980s and the 90s, right? And then we don't see that connection of how one historic event can link to the other. Then we just see, this is extremist, Afghanistan is a haven. But how did it become? It became with the money that was injected, the CIA's largest cover operation. And then, so what happened? In the 2001, they had another chance to choose a different alternative. But who they chose? They chose that warlord of the previous generation who were proven to let our country down, who proven to create a civil war in Afghanistan. They rewarded them again and put them in the position of power. And now it is the people of Afghanistan that is living that consequence and what happened after that. Sometimes I get this question of why do soldiers didn't fight for Afghanistan? Like Afghanistan have so many soldiers. Why they didn't fight? Why they give up? But they don't see that the government that was built in Afghanistan in the past 20 years was not the choosing of the people of Afghanistan. They were the one that was installed in our country, and they had to do what the boss were saying, what the interest of this other countries were involved, and they were saying, we are the one paying. So you have to do what we want you to do, not what the people of Afghanistan thinks is necessary and needs to be done. I think not having that history is making us not see these connections of how did we get here.
Yeah, I'm going to read out a question from the chat, but I will say I can connect Mina and Zahra's interventions because on history and the personal, because actually my grandfather, who was born in the 1900s, was a foot soldier. He was British, and he was a foot soldier in Afghanistan and India, and subsequently became a pacifist, actually, and then was jailed during World War II, which was maybe not the best time to be a pacifist, but anyway. Politically, I mean, not the best time to be a pacifist. So, the connections are, I think Mina was talking about decades. My grandfather, if he were alive, would be well over 100, and he was in Afghanistan, right? So the connections are there already. The question in the chat is, how do ecological threats such as the Afghanistan water crisis exacerbate women's isolation in Afghanistan, and what is being done about the water crisis? I don't know if any of you know what's going on, particularly around that.
I'll give a short answer. I definitely don't have a detailed understanding of it, but I just said if it's asked on a very surface sort of level, our war is definitely exasperated by those natural goods of Afghanistan, from minerals to water to anything else. And at the end of the day, we can, I think, agree that war is usually rooted in some level of greed, and money is never far from the cause of why war happens. And so, yeah, our natural resources have a lot to do with that. I don't know that it's like that in any knowledge of mine that it's very directly related to women, and that's in any sense beyond the fact that war itself always has women and children and suffering first and foremost, whether it's from their own communities shielding to protect them and therefore them not being able to participate in society to the full opportunities, or obviously onwards into security and lack of these goods for their own country, the economy collapsing, et cetera, et cetera. But most certainly, we are not just, conversations. It's not just conversations that have gotten us to where we are. It's most certainly a lot of goods in Afghanistan are appealing to other countries, including our neighbors. Afghanistan is blessed with a lot of natural resources and also cursed with the same thing.
Another question that we would like to raise is about your own work. So doing your own work, of course, faces challenges, and I imagine it also has, particular joys too, when you feel that you're able to make a difference, however small that difference is in the face of enormous injustice. And so the question was just to each of the panelists about what are the challenges that you face in your work, and maybe where do you see the greatest satisfactions in even if they're not necessarily immediately transformative, where do you derive the satisfaction from the work that you're doing? So challenges and satisfaction. Maybe we can go in reverse order if that's all right. So we can ask Sahar first, then Mina, then Zahra, like that.
Yes, thank you. Well, for me, to me personally, it's usually the matter of, as an activist, I think it's sometimes the most difficult thing is finding hope. I know that hope is not one image, and it's not linear. It is some days we can find it, some days it's impossible to find. But it's just becoming more and more difficult to sustain that. And as much as I think having hope is radical, and I really hope we stay radical, but also it consumes a lot from us not seeing any change or immediate change. And Afghanistan didn't become it's not that the Taliban came and took over the country and then we went from heaven to the opposite. It wasn't like that. It was a very patriarchal society and country before that. Those of us who grew up in Afghanistan as young women experienced those, and we have seen and at the same time there was war and ongoing war, and the Taliban and the war took so many of people who were close to us, close to our hearts, our families. We all have lost one or a few people close to us. And all of these have made it as very exhausted. And like as both Zahra and Mina said, it also kind of left us in this continuous survival mode. But also as a feminist, also it's very difficult for me sometimes it's tiring and exhausting to keep explaining again and again that Afghan women are not only that binary of like victims and heroes or heroes. There is more to Afghan women. And we keep saying that all the time, but we keep coming back to the same question mostly. So that is tiring. And also, I think something that personally affects me a lot is the fact that in Afghanistan, there's so much going on, but at the same time, we haven't been able to connect the dots to our people. So with our people or to our people, so they see that the whole society is oppressed when women are oppressed. And that connection, that all oppression is connected, interconnected, is very important. And we haven't been able to do that. So we are fighting different fights. We are using all our energy, all our resources to work on particular things, and instead of being able to connect the dots and see who is with us, who is against us, and how we can go from there. But about what gives me hope is our people. I think we have gone through so much pain, and And our people are going in Afghanistan way more than we can ever imagine or explain. But at the same time, they wake up, and I don't want to glorify it. I don't want to make people be like, okay, well done, Afghan people. But it does take a lot of strength. It does take a lot of strength to know everything is against you and still go and protest. Go get try to print your banner saying breathwork freedom or whatever you want to chant and write it on a banner. No one is printing for you. No one is helping you, providing you with any kind of support. So I do see a lot of hope there. I believe in the movements. I believe that they will be able to at some point, someday, flourish, and they will change the country, women of Afghanistan and people of Afghanistan together. But that connection needs to be made, and I hope we can facilitate that at some point.
Mina, would you like to go next if you have anything to?
I think I do a lot of volunteer mobilizing for support that goes back to Afghanistan, really small scale volunteer things. We created a women's sewing circle to create an employment opportunity for women who had lost their jobs, but then also food packages and things like that. I think where I'm struggling there is obviously the fatigue that comes with 2 years of nonstop asking for support. And it's obviously a loop when it comes to things like famine. You don't solve it by offering a food package, but we're so stuck in survival mode in Afghanistan, or in this crisis, just in overall, that's obviously a challenge. And wanting to simplify the message of what is happening to Afghan women is difficult, because on one hand, we really don't want to take away the nuance that comes with an entire country by saying this is exactly what they want. But because it's quite basic, the things that they're losing, we do really need people to understand that it's, very basic work, school, things like that. And I think it's hard to balance saying to groups like we're in right now, or to even Afghan diaspora that I interact with, to say, to push everyone to be involved, and still walk that fine line between you are responsible to speak up, and also you shouldn't feel guilty about what's going on. I think a lot of people feel like when I tell them to stand up and get involved, that I'm saying it's their fault that it's happening. It's not. And when I, the fact that I am here and not in Afghanistan and suffering, it's not my fault. It's the leaderships that are failing. They're failing in countries that abandon Afghanistan. They're failing in the country or in the organization that's taken over Afghanistan. We don't need to hold the guilt, but just as a human global sort of community, we need to treat each other the way we would hope to be treated if that were our own family, our own sisters going through what's happening in Afghanistan. So that balance, I have a hard time really pushing on people, because I have a hard time holding it myself, letting go of the guilt and saying, but I still am responsible just as a human being.
And Zahra?
Thank you. And I'm, of course, a journalist, and my work is mostly reporting and telling the stories of marginalized communities in Afghanistan, but particularly women at this time. And I'm working closely with a group of women journalists in Afghanistan, and also women journalists in exile, some of them who are waiting for resettlement in another country. When we started Zan Times in August 2022, there's a dynamic that when you start from the need, so we just see the need. We are a group of mostly women journalists, and when we see the need that we have to be there and deliver on our responsibility, I think this is I want to really acknowledge this, that as a woman who became a journalist in Afghanistan, I have a responsibility to be there and to work for my society, to tell their stories, especially now that not many women in Afghanistan can work as a journalist. So this is a responsibility of us doing this work. However, it's very hard when you're trying to establish an organization with little help, because when we started this, we knew, as Mina Jan mentioned, there's a fatigue of people asking for money, especially from Afghanistan. So that's in mind, we didn't start a fundraising or anything. We just say, let's start with whatever we ourselves have. And let's see if people see the importance of our work, we will receive, the support we need to continue our work. Right now, so we are working with this group of journalists, and we receive little help that can support our group, our team in Afghanistan, and some of our colleagues in exile, but some of us are still volunteer. And so this is the problem of funding is a big one, and also the security on the ground. So this is a conscious, struggle that we face every day, because right now being a journalist is somehow criminalized in Afghanistan. Because if you're a journalist and telling the truth, basically you're debunking the Taliban, and you are just letting the world know what's happening and keeping the world informed. That's what the Taliban doesn't want, especially if you're talking about women's rights, if you're talking about the LGBT community. Those are, the areas of the Taliban say no. And so, of course, if you're talking about those, there's a constant threats. And my biggest concern is most of the time is that, like, how do I keep my colleagues in Afghanistan safe while making sure the story of this marginalized community get out of Afghanistan, and also we be able to report on that. And I sort of, I would say for the first, the funding one, there is one way to navigate that. And that's like we're trying to reach out to organizations that are supporting media and just trying to ask for help, which has been useful in some ways, but not always, because we don't have the language of donors, the language of, proposal writing. So that can be a skill that we lack as a journalist coming out of the newsroom, not boardrooms. But that being said, it's like there is something we can do about that. But it's been very hard to navigate the challenge of security on the ground for my colleagues. So what the measure that we have taken is that our colleagues in Afghanistan work with pseudonym or pen name. So it's not the real name, the team that work in Afghanistan. And also one of the measures that we took is that we don't want them to be in a group. So right now our colleagues in Afghanistan doesn't know each other. They only know the people who are outside the country. That way we feel it's safer for them. So if God forbid one of them caught, so they cannot be able to identify the rest of the team who are working in Afghanistan. And so we asked them to not call the Taliban. And so if we need to get any comment from the Taliban, this will be our team member calling from outside Afghanistan. And so that is a challenge, an ongoing challenge that we have to deal with it every day. But yeah, I would just say for now, these two are the biggest challenge we are facing.
We have some more questions. Thank you for all of that. It's illuminating on some of the complexities of trying to do this work from the diaspora. Shamael asked me to read out her question, so I will. It is the following. Salam to my Afghan sisters and salam to all. Why do we as Afghan women and intersectional feminists or how do we as Afghan women and intersectional feminists navigating fighting for the liberation of our country, within our country and in international spaces, how do we carry out this struggle without it being hijacked by white imperialist and colonialist feminists? For example, Afghan women voices that are constantly or consistently platformed within global politics are the ones that promote white Western status quo narratives. And on the other hand, Indigenous, intersectional, and radical Afghan women's voices are silenced. So how do we navigate the ways in which, a powerful kind of Western media, but also Western academia can invite and amplify the voices of certain kinds of Afghan women and then silence or marginalize other sorts of voices?
If I can jump in, so go ahead, Sarjan. I'll go after you.
Okay. Salam, Shamael. It's so good to see you here. I think I want to be. This is a difficult question because we are all aware of power dynamic. We know where we're standing, where white feminism is standing, and other kind of feminisms are standing. This is probably, we're not the only ones facing these challenges, but I think it's. I was thinking about the way I think about it is that we need to ask questions and we need to understand where we're standing and how do we bargain, because we are not in a situation where we could afford not bargaining. And for that, we are, we need all different kind of feminists. We need those who are radical and who want to dismantle the whole system and the whole systems of power and structures, and those who are working around it, and those who are working with international organizations, international communities. I think if we come to an understanding where we each do our own job, at the same time educating our people who are serving, let's say, white feminism, or those who are actually perpetuating this, how do we educate them? Because, sadly, people who are standing in a lesser position of power always have to educate more. And if you have get some privileges of being insider and outsider, having an understanding or privilege of understanding inside and the world outside and the politics around it, there is obviously more responsibility towards you as you educate yourself, you, me, any of us. So I think it's to acknowledge our roles and also keep repeating it, that whoever wants to talk to Afghanistan, engage with Afghanistan, invite speakers to consult with a wide group of people, have women from different backgrounds and different generations, because all these categories, they give us different person or a perspective. So wherever we're standing, where we're working with an international organization, we're working with a national NGO, or anywhere in politics, it's important, obviously, to check with ourselves, our own politics, but also understanding that sometimes it works, and more power to those who work and think and act radically. But sometimes where you're standing, it doesn't work. But that sense of solidarity and sisterhood and that concern to dismantle these structures is in the hearts of all of us, hopefully. And those who are not, hopefully they will change, or maybe it's their politics and hard to change.
If I jump in.
Zahra and then Mina, yeah.
Yeah. Thank you, Shamal Jan, for this question. So I am very new, like not so new, like maybe 5 years now I'm in Canada, and engaging with different form of feminism and what they want and how they look at us. So my answer is very personal, coming from my experience. I have feminist friend from Western countries, and they were very helpful for me until the point that I was doing what they wanted me to do, or just they helping me. And the moment that I made my mind that this is the way I want to go, this is what I want to do, they pushed back and say like, no, but we think this is what's good for you. Like, this is what we imagine you be doing. And that was the point that really, gets me thinking in terms of like, oh my God, there's all people, there's all helping and supporting me was a way for them and to somehow build their own politics of just saying, oh, I am in solidarity with this woman. I am working for them. I am helping them. But I think that helping them and solidarity should not be making decision for them. I think there should be a line between helping and making decision for them. And when that line is not clear, it gets very much, I think, it's hard, especially for us not coming from position of power and, like having a disadvantaged position. So it tends for us always, it's costly to speak. It's costly to critique them and to reject them and to push them back. I did. And they totally cut off their relationship with me and say they don't want to be in contact with me. They don't want to talk with me because I am doing what I want to do, not accepting what they wanted me to do. I think that's, I was talking yesterday to one of my friends about this, and this was that we have to be really mindful of what we really want, and to be able, as Sahar said, we have to first educate ourselves and really know to our heart what's our politics, what we are pushing for. And I think it's always costly to speak. It's always costly to be critical of things, and I think that cost for me is more personally, and I am willing to take that cost because it hurt me personally. But if I remain silent, that hurt would collectively, that would really hurt our collective understanding of, like what Afghan women are like, what they're doing, what they're pushing for. I think it's, even though costly, it's always, for my perception or my experience, better to talk, because if we don't talk, things would be bad and harmful for our collective generation. And that's why I always talk my mind and I won't hold back.
I'll just quickly say that to me, I mean, obviously there's times that I'm very hurt by this, by the fact that we are really sort of forced to fit into a lens that is suitable for feminists outside in the Western sense, meaning, for example, I was very offended that when it was about women's clothing, everyone got involved and said, oh, tell me more about what Afghan women wear versus what's being imposed. And everyone is ready to talk about it. But the concept of women can't leave and go to university is just, it's just not, relatable enough for what are hot topics here on what women are meant to discuss. And that's the patriarchy at work. That's not the, I don't think, a failure on each person's individual level. But it really brings me back to what I think we can do tangibly. And this is one of them. You don't hear from Afghan women often. I mean, I've rarely been on a panel where all of us are Afghan, where there's more than just me, or that there's three of us. Is just mind-blowing to me. The special representative for Joe Biden the other day posted a photo that, yes, she's Afghan, but she posted a photo of a meeting she hosted, and her guest was Malala, who's from a different country. There was not a single Afghan in that entire space. You're surrounded by women who are newly exiled from Afghanistan who could tell you exactly what is going on in Afghanistan. You could talk to women who have literally also been shot by the Taliban but continued to go to school. But because we're just kind of status quoing everything, we continue to just listen to what's close enough, or some expert that wrote a book about Afghanistan that's gonna resonate with me. And I think if we really give the audience the responsibility, and that's where I'm saying practically this is something you can do, is when you hear conversations about Afghanistan, when you read books about Afghanistan, when you are in spaces that discuss Afghanistan, which I think as feminists, you're going to come across that even more. So I ask you to sort of step in and say, there are not enough Afghans in this space. We don't want silence from everyone else, but we want to be, supported, not spoken for. And as long as it continues to be totally fine for an audience to have Malala speak, a Pakistani British woman who lives in London can't speak about what's going on in Afghanistan on the same level that an Afghan woman can. And I think, rather than just accepting it, you have to know that Afghan women, thumping their chests and begging to be heard, it's not cutting it, and it hasn't cut it before. And if we'd been listening to Afghan women this entire 20 years, we wouldn't be confused about what they want to wear and whether or not they want to go to school. We're confused because we haven't been listening this whole time. So as audience members, I beg that we really take a stand and say, I'm happy to see Malala or whoever else, but I would like to demand that I'm also hearing from an Afghan woman or from someone who has a lived experience in Afghanistan, because if you as an audience aren't asking for it, our yelling and screaming and demanding to be heard, it's not going to do anything. So that's one of my homework assignments for all of you.
And I did put in the chat for those of you who are interested, can link to the Dan Times, which of course is Zahra's news outlet. So you can look there. And this is Afghan women speaking in part at great risk from Afghanistan, as Zahra has explained. And also the Center for Feminist Research supports a group called the Kabul Arts Cafe, which is young Afghan girls in the diaspora. And they are kind of write about some of their experiences and are trying to provide a more diverse view, I think, well, just a range of voices, so that, again, we don't have this kind of monolithic voice coming out of Afghanistan, which is quite important. We have 10 minutes left, and I see one hand up, and I know that Sylvia did email me, so I'm not jumping the queue for you, Nadia. It's just that Sylvia very politely asked me if she could ask a question, and since she's organized this, I think that it's all right that she asks a question. So I'll go to Sylvia, ask her question, get a quick response, and then I'll go to you, Nadia, and then we're going to close very shortly with enormous thanks to everyone for their time and insights. So Sylvia, this is your chance.
Thank you so much, Elaine, for the opportunity. This has been really great conversation, and I'm really glad that you are moderating the Q&A, because so many things that our panelists are speaking about, I was just nodding and I was saying, oh my goodness, this is sort of my experience as well. For those of us who are othered, we always have to go back to as Mina has said, we always have to go back to these stories. And even when you are saying something that is joyful, people are like, but what about this? And sometimes I try to say, not today, right? Today, can we have a moment where all we are speaking about is joy, because there is that part of the story too, which most often than not, we are not attending to, in part because there are always going to be these pressing issues. So I'm really glad to have had that, opportunity. One thing that I wanted to ask, and Mina, you ended on the note of, homework and practical things that we can do. And I think you all kind of mentioned that. And yes, more of those if you can. The other thing that I wanted to ask, is related to everything that you've talked about, all of you, this history and finding hope for the future. And you've all said it very well that, when we are just sitting with the survival and finding ways to survive day after day, sometimes then we are not imagining the future because we don't even have the luxury, we don't even have the time. And so mine is a very sort of, hopeful thing. How do you imagine if you had the chance to create the future, which I think that we have to also encourage, in as much as we talk about the survival. I mean, you've all mentioned it. How are we using that history to imagine a future so that we are also writing a different narrative so that the generations that are coming after you from Afghanistan can read something else that is not, all of the other things that we see on a regular basis. So that's sort of my question. So maybe we can take Nigeria's conversation as well so that the panelists can have a last go at this before we conclude the panel. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Sylvia. Yeah, I think the dynamics are similar to many, the kind of what does solidarity look like between Western and non-Western feminists? And we have similar sorts of repetitions of bad practices on the part of Western feminists like myself. So next we'll go to Nadia. And if you could just keep it to about 2 minutes so we can leave 2 minutes each for our panelists and so that we don't take up too much more of their time. And then we'll thank everybody, including all the people who listened, all the people who offered questions, especially to our panelists, and conclude. So Nadia, you have everything you have to say in 2 minutes.
Okay, so I have 3 assignments for our younger generations, not only for Afghan younger generation, but all feminist movement. When we are talking about white supremacy, whatever, so how decolonialize feminism, this is one thing. But when we are saying what is then solidarity, the definition of feminism, solidarity should be defined by feminists, not dictated by someone else. First, secondly, what is the red lines? Like my working for United Nations and being an activist throughout my life, I always notice that when there is rights of a certain countries come to question by whatever politics, then the national interest versus women's rights are question, and like my nationalist interest is more important than Afghan women rights. This is or another politics played. And then my third question, are we as a women feminist movement, are we enough strong to challenge all the status quo happening from the reality on the grounds to the academia level to the movement of whites or movement of blacks or movement of indigenous people? So I have these three questions, not only for the panelists, but for all of us to address and find a really practical solution to transfer to the future generations.
Yeah, that's a beautiful introduction to just final thoughts from each of our guests. And maybe this time we'll have Mina first, then Zahra, then Sahar, and then we'll close. But thank you very much for that.
Sure, I'll go a little backwards to, what my ideal would be. I'm very much an idealist. So my ideal would be that Afghanistan has a little window, a very first time window of not having interference in the country's in how the country is run. I don't know what that looks like because for so long it's been one country after another creating conflict in Afghanistan. Now, when we talk about reaching out to political figures now, that obviously doesn't match what I'm saying. I'm not saying that we need to drop that. I'm saying that we need to break that cycle. We're not asking for people to come and save Afghanistan. I think step one is we're demanding that these governments, these leaderships that we live under, stop supporting what is going on in Afghanistan, because they're not just watching it. They didn't just walk away and we were left to our own devices. They continue to support them. They continue to legitimize them. And the threat of losing that legitimacy is what is going to end up supporting the women of Afghanistan and their rights. These conditions need to be placed on them. So that's the kind of messaging that we would like from outside of Afghanistan, rather than putting it on everyone's shoulders to come and save us. We don't want that. I would really ideally like to see Afghanistan have that sense of security where we can start to build. We have our own inner conflicts to deal with. We have our own issues. We've had so many years of conflict to build from. I'm not going to continue too much more, but for that little everyday life access to Afghanistan, you're welcome to follow me on Instagram. It's a very happy place for me. I share photos from when I was there, insights, and just really everyday life, because I think we've been indoctrinated to think that that didn't exist this entire time. So I'm happy to voluntarily share that with whoever wants to learn more about it. So thank you for having me here.
Thank you, Mina John. I just want to echo what Mina John said about that we don't want a savior to come and save us and then we have another invasion and then we live through that. What we want is just for now, like what we see right now happening is this Western countries coming together and injecting 40 million money every week into Afghanistan, where we doesn't have a clear idea of where that money is going. What we are hearing, what my colleagues in Afghanistan are talking to the people, they're saying that this money is not going to the people it intended to go to, right? And then when that money is not going, it means going to keep the Taliban system running, and that should not be happening. And also the legitimacy that they're creating, inviting Taliban come to Norway and traveling freely in a private jet. I think that is a very hard slap to the face of Afghan women who are imprisoned in their houses, that they cannot leave their house because the Taliban won't let them. And then these Western countries who are claiming to be a liberator of women and giving women equal rights are inviting them on a red carpet. I think that is not solidarity, and that should not be happening. And when this is happening, we demand accountability of why, we really hope that women of each country, that their politics of the government are engaged in legitimizing the Taliban. We hope that they stand up to their government and they say that this is not correct and this should be stopped and this should be stopped now. Just building that. And also, I think if we are given the chance, people of Afghanistan can build their country. Because when we were in school, I grew up in a place that we didn't have running water, we didn't have electricity, but the school was open and all of us were happy. We never complained about the things that was wrong. We were hopeful because we were thinking that we have a chance to build our country, and that chance was taken from us. And I guess if we have that chance, we can build our country, and that's what we need.
I will just add as well that to Sylvia's question, I personally think we need a break. We need a break from a lot of things, but also break from war, from conflict. And what people think that right now we have there is no war, it's a break. That I think that's all a big lie, and we shouldn't go with that narrative. I do hope we see in Afghanistan a feminist future, a future where, even if we don't see it today or for Afghanistan present, a future where a lot of parties, we are able to hold accountable all the parties who started this war and who continued to do so, and all of them. And in terms of feminist solidarity, I just want to say that we as feminists, we do know that the personal is political and the political is personal. So what's happening to women in Afghanistan is not going to remain in the borders of Afghanistan. We can already see that it's not. It's the same with the movements, with the activism. It's not staying in the borders of Afghanistan, but it has two sides to it. So if you're hopeful, you need to be worried about the other side of it as well. But as feminists, I hope we can practice, listening and collective self-reflection, continuous self-reflection. Being all about nuance, but also check with other people what nuance mean, where you're seeing it from, and being good allies. As allies, it's not easy. You can be, you need to be patient as allies, because if you as a person are not responsible for the mess in a country, but your country is or was, and you are benefiting directly or indirectly from that structure, then that is personal to you as well. So whenever we ask our allies, we also question our allies and we criticize. And I hope we can build a level of patience and solidarity. And the last thing I want to say is that Afghanistan is a collective mess, and curing it, helping it, making it better, whatever we call it, requires collective will and collective solidarity. We need anger. I think anger is a very important emotion, and we need to be angry that it's 547 days that girls are out of school, and we need that rage, and may that rage help us do better. Thanks so much for having me in this panel.
Yes, a huge thank you to everyone. I'll turn just over to Professor Bawa for some closing words, but thank you to everyone.
Yes, thank you so much to everyone. Really, this has been such a fantastic conversation, and I'm really grateful, especially to our panelists for taking the time to talk again about Afghanistan, given that this can be exhausting work, but I'm really also grateful that you saw the importance of having this conversation with all of us today. So I also want to echo Elaine in thanking Susan Foster, who always makes all these possible, these conversations possible for all of us. And of course, to the Center for Feminist Research for partnering with us. Again, to Mina, Sharif, Zahra, Nader, and Sahar, Fetrat, for your work, for all that you are continuing to do, and of course to our audience again. This happens to be our last global conversation for the year, but please subscribe to our news, what is it called? The news, the listserv, the listserv, because we also hold free methods workshops, on various things. Upcoming will be methods workshops on collecting data, computational methods, and data visualization as public sociology, visualizing intersectionality and other. And they are free of charge to anyone because they are also held on Zoom. I think I provided the wrong link initially for our YouTube channel. I think I found the right one, which I've just put in the chat. But again, until the next time, thank you so much. And let's keep hope alive, as you've said. Thank you.